We are starting a necessary and really challenging examination today. We're focusing on one of the most enduring and tragic cold cases in American history, the Bear Brook murders, which some of you might know as the Allenstown Four. Our intention here is to conduct a thorough review of the sources, all the material we have, and it's a stack of decades of investigation, forensic breakthroughs, and just agonizing uncertainty. We want to understand the long, winding path that finally led to four unidentified victims getting their names back.
And it's just so essential that we approach this material with profound respect and, sympathy for the victims and for their families.
Absolutely.
We're discussing the lives of Marlies Honeychurch, her daughters Marie Vaughn and Sarah McWaters, and the child later identified as Terry Rasmussen. These were real lives, tragically lost, and they left a void that persisted for over 40 years. The journey to their identification wasn't just about police work. It was a decades-long saga. It was defined by this relentless scientific and genealogical effort.
It really was. The weight of this particular material is immense. And what the sources provide is more than just a chronological account. It really functions as a forensic roadmap.
That's a good way to put it.
We can trace the story from the initial, just horrific discoveries in New Hampshire right up to the final positive victim identifications, which are completed in 2025. A central theme we have to explore is the critical and often groundbreaking role that modern DNA technology played, specifically genetic genealogy, in breaking this case wide open when, traditional methods had just failed.
That really is the nexus of the whole case. That technology literally bridged these enormous gaps in time and distance. It linked crimes committed in the northeastern U.S. to people who actually originated in the West. So we're examining how a crime that went cold in the early 1980s was finally solved in the 2020s. And it just shows the exponential evolution of forensic science.
So the core question we're trying to answer as we guide you through this whole analysis is this. How did this cold case, which had baffled investigators for more than 4 decades, finally yield answers? And what did that complex, multi-layered process ultimately reveal about the man responsible for these lives lost, Terry Peter Rasmussen?
That transition from unknown victims and an unknown perpetrator to the named killer, Terry Peter Rasmussen. That's the true narrative arc here. But we absolutely have to start exactly where the mystery began, deep in the woods of Bear Brook State Park.
Let's transport ourselves back to the autumn of 1985. The date is November 10th. We're in Allenstown, New Hampshire, which is a quiet area, and it was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight. A hunter was out near a remote site that had previously held a burned-down store. This is inside the vast expanse of Bear Brook State Park, and he made a discovery that no one could have prepared for.
No. The hunter found a metal 55-gallon drum, just a common industrial container, and it was concealed in the woods. When authorities opened it, the contents were just devastating. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were the remains of 2 individuals. They were partially or completely skeletonized.
Wow.
An adult female, estimated to be between 23 and 33 years old, and a young girl who they believed was between 8 and 10. And that plastic wrapping, the use of the steel drum, it was a clear indication of a deliberate effort at concealment.
So the autopsies would have confirmed the worst immediately. This was a homicide.
Right away. Both victims had died of blunt trauma. It was very clear these were not natural deaths or accidents. They were brutally murdered and dumped.
What always struck me when reviewing the source material was the sheer sense of hopelessness that followed this discovery. It's really symbolized by the original tombstone they erected for these 2 unidentified people.
It really crystallized the decades of unanswered questions.
Right.
That original marker was just heartbreakingly stark. It read, "Here lies the mortal remains known only to God of a woman aged 23-33 and a girl child aged 8-10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10th, 1985, in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care."
Known only to God.
Yeah. That phrase truly defined the case for the next 30 years. It just speaks volumes about the lack of conventional forensic tools that were available to investigators at the time.
And then, 15 years later, the sheer horror of this discovery was compounded. On May 9, 2000, investigators returned to the general area near the original site, and they found a second 55-gallon metal drum.
This was just an astonishing and grim discovery. The second barrel also contained human remains. This time it was 2 more young girls.
2 more.
Yeah. This discovery immediately doubled the victim count. It transformed the case for 2 unidentified individuals to the Allenstown Four. And the fact that they were concealed using the exact same method, the same type of container, it strongly suggested a single perpetrator.
This immediately brings up the crucial question that plagued the early years of the investigation, right? If these barrels were found relatively close together, why was the second one missed during that intensive search back in 1985? 15 years is an enormous window for vital evidence to degrade or for the killer to get away clean.
Well, the sources clarify that this wasn't necessarily an error of incompetence, but more one of perimeter
Well,
definition.
okay.
Investigators later stated that the second drum, while it was nearby, was located outside the established perimeter of the initial crime scene investigation that they conducted in '85. It really underscores the challenges of forensic work in these vast outdoor natural environments.
Sure.
Over those 15 years, things shift. Vegetation grows, weather changes the terrain. It makes it incredibly easy to overlook something so well concealed, even a large drum.
So by the year 2000, police now have 4 victims, all seemingly connected. What was crucial about the timing they established?
Based on all the forensic evidence, the decomposition rates, police ultimately concluded that all 4 murders, the adult and the 3 children, are believed to have occurred around the same period, roughly between 1977 and 1981.
That's a pretty tight window.
It is, and that narrow window became vital for trying to link them to missing persons reports.
And crucially, the cause of death was consistent across all the victims.
Yes. Confirmation came quickly. The cause of death for all the children was also blunt force trauma, just like the adult woman,
The same method.
the exact same brutal method, and this established a clear link even before any genetic confirmation of a family unit was available. So that timeline, 1977 to 1981, was now the narrow focus. They were just trying to match these bodies to disappearances from that era.
So once the bodies were found, the immediate necessity was identification. And in the absence of names or dental records that matched any existing files, the earliest phase of the investigation relied purely on skeletal forensics. Trying to build a human profile from the remains. Let's detail what investigators knew about these victims before their identities were confirmed, just to illustrate the sheer difficulty of the task they were facing.
Right. So the initial profile for the adult, who we now know as Marlise Honeychurch, determined she was Caucasian. But they thought possibly it was some Native American ancestry that the common feature investigators explored when bodies remained unidentified. Her estimated height range was quite broad, between 5'2" and 5'7". But the most promising piece of evidence was her dental record.
Oh.
She had significant, extensive dental work, multiple fillings, and 3 extractions.
You would think that sort of significant dental work would be a fast track to identification. Assuming she had dentists who kept records, why wasn't that enough?
And that's the puzzle, isn't it? It suggests a couple of possibilities. Either she was highly transient, receiving dental work across multiple states where the records were never consolidated, or perhaps the records simply didn't exist in the necessary databases at the time.
And there's another possibility.
Yes. If she was using an alias, as her killer was, any dental records she did have might have been under a name that didn't match the missing person's files. So it's a dead end.
So turning to the girls, the oldest, Marie Vaughn, was estimated to be between 5 and 11 years old. And she presented a few distinctive features, from what I understand.
She did. She showed signs suggesting she had suffered from pneumonia at some point. And critically, she had specific dental features: a crooked front tooth and a diastema.
That's the gap, right?
Exactly, that noticeable gap between the top front teeth. She was also found wearing 2 earrings in each ear, which indicates maybe a cultural or familial detail. But significantly, she had no dental fillings. This suggested either a younger age or just excellent dental health, which again limited the paper trail.
The child initially referred to as the middle child, who we now know is Ray Rasmussen. She presented a unique problem, mainly because she was ultimately confirmed to be unrelated to the others. What did they know about her?
Rhea was estimated to be between 2 and 4 years old, with brown hair and about 3 feet 8 inches tall. She had an overbite and also a noticeable gap between her front teeth. Investigators also suspected she may have suffered from anemia, which could indicate possible long-term nutritional issues.
And there was also some confusion around her lineage early on, which really highlights the early limitations of DNA analysis.
Exactly. The initial DNA analysis suggested she was primarily Caucasian, but with slight Asian, African, and Native American heritage. This conflicting, sort of ambiguous result only added to the confusion. However, the updated testing that was conducted much later, around 2024, provided definitive clarity.
And what did that show?
It confirmed she was of full European descent. And that progression shows how forensic science itself had to evolve to correctly interpret the victim's background.
And finally, the youngest girl, Sarah McWaters.
Sarah was estimated to be only 1 to 3 years old. She was found with long blonde or light brown hair, and she too had a gap between her front teeth, a physical feature that was shared by 2 of the 3 children. Initially, all 3 girls were thought to have some Native American heritage, although their complexions were generally light or European American. Again, it just demonstrates the challenges of making definitive ethnic calls based on skeletal remains alone.
And to try and break through this anonymity, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, they conducted multiple facial reconstruction efforts. They released versions in 2013 and again in 2015.
These reconstructions were absolutely vital for keeping the case in the public eye, but they perfectly illustrate the limitations investigators were working under. The sources note that these visual aids had to heavily incorporate the victim's dental information. The alignment and spacing of their teeth drastically influenced the appearance of their faces. So if the dental records were wrong, the face would be wrong.
And it's a sobering thought that they had to be released only in black and white.
Correct. They simply could not determine their actual skin tones or eye colors from the skeletal remains. So investigators had all this precise physical dated dental records, estimated ages, trauma details, but the fundamental information, their names, remained elusive. Despite high-profile media coverage across the U.S. and Canada and hundreds of leads pursued, they were repeatedly thwarted. We know at least 10 possible identities were investigated and definitively ruled out before the real breakthrough occurred.
So the case moved into this critical new phase around 2014. The focus shifted from trying to match physical descriptions to using internal biological evidence. This is where DNA technology provided the first concrete, undeniable answers.
This is the turning point, absolutely. The key finding came via mitochondrial DNA or mitoDNA profiling. This was between 2014 and 2015, and this is a special type of DNA that is inherited only through the maternal line.
So let's break down that technology for a moment for our listeners. MitoDNA is passed down essentially unchanged from a mother to her child. So what did the tests confirm?
The test confirmed a maternal link between 3 of the 4 victims: the adult woman, the oldest girl, and the youngest girl.
Right.
This meant they were related through the female line. So initially they thought mother, aunt, or sister.
And then they refined that.
By 2015, yes. Advanced nuclear DNA testing solidified this. It proved the adult woman was the biological mother of those 2 specific girls, Marie and Sarah. This meant they were now looking for a family unit that had vanished together.
And here's where the investigation fundamentally changed. This crucial realization meant 3 of the victims formed one family unit. But it simultaneously highlighted the profound isolation of the 4th victim, Rhea, the middle child. She was confirmed to be entirely unrelated to the mother and her 2 daughters.
That finding was a breakthrough and a complication all at once. Now, police were essentially hunting for 2 different missing persons cases that were linked by a single perpetrator and a single dumping site.
They had the DNA to confirm the connections.
But no names. Exactly.
Beyond the biological relationships, investigators employed another advanced technique that speaks to geographical mobility: isotopic evidence. For the audience, how does that work, and what did it tell investigators about the victims' lives?
Isotopic analysis is truly fascinating. It measures the chemical signatures, specifically stable isotopes of elements like oxygen and strontium that are left in a person's bones and teeth.
Okay.
These elements are absorbed through the water and food you consume, and since the geological composition varies across the globe, the signatures act like a chemical passport. They can pinpoint where a person lived at different stages of their life.
So what did the isotopes tell them about the family unit, Marlise, Marie, and Sarah?
The forensic information suggested that the mother and her 2 related children, the Honeychurch family, had resided in the northeastern United States, and for a period ranging from just 2 weeks to 3 months immediately before their deaths.
Wow, that's specific.
It was a vital clue. It suggested they had recently moved to the area where their bodies were found, placing them near New Hampshire shortly before the murder.
But the isotopic profile for the unrelated child, Terry Rasmussen, offered a wildly different and initially confusing picture.
It did. It further emphasized her separation from the others. Initially, forensic testing for Rhea suggested she spent most of her childhood either in the upper Northeast or the upper Midwest. Wisconsin was even mentioned as a possibility. However, later, a more refined analysis in 2019 complicated this. It suggested she most likely originated from arid areas far away, like Arizona, Texas, California, or Oregon.
So why the conflict in the data? What did that reveal about early forensic testing versus later refinement?
It revealed that initial broader isotopic testing can suggest a region, but later, highly refined analysis combining isotopes with other trace elements in geological databases could get much more specific. The conflicting data pointed toward a life of significant movement before her death, and crucially, those Western origins like California and Arizona would become highly relevant once the killer was identified.
This evidence, both biological and geographical, gave police a major new investigative track. And the most startling biological clue about the unrelated child's background confirmed a direct link to the man they would later realize was the killer.
That single link was the anchor. The investigation was able to conclusively determine that the middle child, Rhea, was fathered by the man then only known by the alias Robert Bob Evans.
Oh.
This was achieved by comparing the child's DNA with samples taken from the male figure they suspected. It was a crucial moment that transitioned the investigation from identifying victims to identifying a suspect.
With that link established, the narrative takes this massive turn in 2017. The focus shifts aggressively from simply identifying the 4 victims to identifying Bob Evans and connecting him to other known disappearances. This is where the sheer scale of the killer's deception truly comes to light.
In January 2017, the investigation officially connected the disappearance of Denise Bowden from Manchester, New Hampshire to the Allenstown murders. Bowden had disappeared around Thanksgiving 1981, along with her young daughter and her then-boyfriend.
Robert Bob Evans?
Robert Bobbins.
And Manchester is geographically close enough to Bear Brook State Park to make that connection highly suspicious. But DNA testing quickly established a key detail. The adult Bear Brook victim was not Denise Bowden.
Correct. Marley's Honeychurch was not Bowden. However, the connection to Bowden was still vital, because it provided a definite identity for the child that Evans had later abandoned in California 5 years later. It gave investigators a solid starting point for tracing Evans' movements and actions over 2 decades.
Let's detail the long, strange trail of Bob Evans, because the use of aliases, this chameleon killer aspect, is central to understanding how he evaded justice for so long.
Evans abandoned Bowden's daughter, who was known publicly only as Lisa to protect her privacy, at a campground in California in 1986. He served prison time for that abandonment under the name Gordon Jensen.
Another name.
Another name. But his true identity still didn't emerge until he was arrested under yet another alias, Curtis Kimball, in 2002. This was for the murder and dismemberment of his then-wife, Unsoon June, who was a chemist in California. He was convicted and died in prison in 2010.
This just highlights a decades-long pattern of extreme violence and deep identity concealment. It was after his 2002 arrest as Curtis Kimball that police began systematically looking into his background and conducted DNA tests. And this initial round of testing confirmed that Lisa, Bowden's daughter whom he had abandoned, was not his biological child.
And that finding, combined with the later revelation that the middle Bear Brook victim was his biological daughter, showed a terrifying pattern. He would assume aliases, form relationships, father or kidnap children, and then abandon or murder them, only to resurface years later with a new life and a new alias.
Unbelievable.
He'd already abandoned or killed his own biological daughter, Rhea, years earlier in New Hampshire.
The true identity of Bob Evans was finally revealed in 2017 as Terry Rasmussen. How exactly did genetic genealogy, led by Barbara Reventer, manage to accomplish this? And why was this methodology even needed?
Well, traditional forensic DNA databases, like CODIS, they rely on matching crime scene DNA to existing DNA profiles of known offenders. Rasmussen's DNA was not in CODIS, so a different approach was required: genetic genealogy. This involves taking the DNA sample, in this case DNA extracted from the killer's remains, and uploading it to public genealogical databases, like the ones used by amateur genealogists. GED match is a common one.
So they weren't matching him directly, they were looking for relatives.
Exactly. They used Y-DNA testing, which traces the paternal line, to find highly distant relatives, third or fourth cousins, who had voluntarily submitted their DNA to public databases. Now, these relatives knew nothing of the crime, but by building a massive family tree backward and forward, using birth records, marriage records, census data, the genealogists were able to identify a specific narrow branch of the family that led directly to Terry Rasmussen, born in 1943 in Denver, Colorado. The sample that confirmed the final identity came from one of his adult children from his first marriage.
Let's talk about Rasmussen's known timeline before he became the chameleon killer. He married in 1968, had 4 children between 1969 and 1972, and lived in places like Phoenix, Arizona, and Redwood City, California. But his family last saw him around Christmas 1974. That's a crucial gap over 4 years, before he appears in New Hampshire under the alias Robert Evans, having already killed Marlise and her 2 daughters.
The sources describe a man who just completely severed ties, intentionally disappearing. During those 4 years, from 74 to 78, he was likely already traveling, committing crimes, and establishing this pattern of aliases. The known aliases include Robert Evans, Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Larry Vanner, and Jerry Mockerman.
At least 5.
At least 5 different names in a decades-long run of crimes across the country, including the 5 confirmed homicides. The extent of his movement, California, Arizona, New Hampshire, Texas, and back to California, it just demonstrates an extreme level of deceit.
And what's truly insightful here is the historical significance. The groundbreaking use of genetic genealogy in this very case to identify suspect, Terry Rasmussen, established a viable legal and technological precedent.
That fact is so often undersold. The work done to identify Rasmussen established the methodology as a cutting-edge tool for law enforcement. This occurred before the exact same methodology was used to capture the Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo, in 2018.
So this case came first.
Yes. The Bear Brook case was a proving ground. It demonstrated that even decades-old, degraded DNA could be used to solve cases that were technologically stagnant. The legal hurdles they overcame in this case paved the way for dozens of future cold case resolutions.
So with the killer identified as Rasmussen, the investigation swung back to giving names to the victims. And the identification of the 3 related victims, Marlise, Marie, and Sarah, is just a remarkable story of combining that high-tech DNA with incredibly persistent, low-tech, digital civilian sleuthing.
The sheer coincidence and dedication required for this breakthrough are just astonishing. The credit belongs largely to Rebecca Heath, who worked as a librarian and was a dedicated web sleuth. In October 2018, she was meticulously searching public databases and found an Ancestry.com post dating all the way back to 1999.
A 20-year-old message board post. That sounds like an impossible needle in a haystack.
It was. This post was created by Sarah McWater's younger half-brother who never met her but was actively searching for his missing sibling. And the post contained crucial names and dates associated with the disappearance from California.
How did she manage to connect a missing persons post from California to skeletal remains found in a New Hampshire barrel?
Heath cross-referenced the details against the Bear Brook descriptions. She found that the missing mother, Marlise Honeychurch, had 2 daughters whose ages matched the estimated ages of the 3 related victims found in the barrel. And the final, critical clue came when Heath contacted a family relative mentioned in the posts. And that relative mentioned that Honeychurch had married a man with the last name Rasmussen.
Rasmussen, the same last name that the killer, Terry Rasmussen, had just been confirmed to have, even if he didn't use it in New Hampshire. That must have been the moment investigators realized the case was solved.
It was the perfect storm of DNA, forensics, and civilian persistence. Heath immediately shared her findings with investigators, providing the genealogical roadmap they needed to confirm the identities on June 6, 2019. And they did that through further DNA comparison with surviving family members.
So, the mother was identified as Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch, born in 1954. Her oldest daughter was Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, born in 1971, from a previous marriage that had ended by 1974. And the youngest girl was Sarah Lynn McWaters, born in 1977, also from a different father.
The timeline of their disappearance finally aligned perfectly with Rasmussen's known movements. They went missing from La Puente, California, around Thanksgiving 1978, while Marlise was dating Rasmussen. The sources mentioned that Marlise had an argument with her mother right before she left and tragically never contacted her relatives again.
It's a common scenario, isn't it? Cold case killers exploiting that to make victims appear as if they simply chose to vanish.
Exactly. And there's also that detail that Marlise may have used one of Rasmussen's aliases in her documents.
Right.
Yes. Investigators found evidence suggesting Marlise may have used the alias Elizabeth Evans in legal documents in May 1980. This links her directly to the Bob Evans alias Rasmussen was using in New Hampshire when he disappeared in 1981. It suggests Marlise lived under this assumed identity, perhaps believing Rasmussen was simply Bob Evans, for a period of time before her death.
It seems highly probable that by 1981, when Rasmussen disappeared from New Hampshire, Marlise, Marie, and Sarah had already been murdered. They were likely in that first barrel. The confirmation of their identity provided immense closure for their surviving family members.
It brought dignity back to their memory. That closure was so powerfully symbolized by the funeral held in November 2019. Marlise and Marie were laid to rest together in Allenstown, New Hampshire. They finally received a new, proper headstone bearing their names, replacing that sad, anonymous original marker.
And Sarah was laid to rest separately in Connecticut, closer to her father's family, which reflects the complex reality of these fractured family units that Rasmussen preyed upon. This confirmation, Marlise Honeychurch, Marie Vaughn, and Sarah McWaters, was a monumental victory for justice. Even after the Honeychurch family was identified, one victim, the middle child, remained anonymous. She was separated by lineage and geography from the others, yet tragically connected by her father, Terry Rasmussen. This must have been a frustrating, isolating period for the investigators.
It was the last, most difficult piece of the puzzle. We already knew she was Terry Rasmussen's biological daughter, confirmed through advanced DNA testing. The focus then shifted entirely to identifying her mother, a search that proved incredibly complex because the mother had also vanished without a trace, likely a victim herself.
Investigators were incredibly persistent in trying to find that maternal link, using all the technological tools available. We know that prior to the final identification, they were pursuing specific leads, even naming a missing woman as a strong possibility. Pepper Reed, I believe, born in 1952, who had disappeared in the 1970s.
That lead didn't pan out, but the genealogical effort continued to be staggering. They used advanced genetic genealogy to trace the child's maternal lineage to distant relatives in Pearl River County, Mississippi. They believed the mother was a descendant of Thomas Deadhorse Mitchell, a man born in 1836.
That is an immense generational leap. How does one go from a forensic sample to tracking down a fifth or sixth great-grandfather in Mississippi?
It requires extreme patience and immense manual labor. They rely on finding those distant cousins, third, fourth, or fifth cousins, who share small, traceable segments of DNA. They then build these enormous family trees, sometimes containing thousands of individuals, working backward through vital records, probate records, church documents, to find common ancestors. Identifying someone like Thomas Mitchell provides a geographical anchor and a family history that can then be searched forward, generation by generation, to find the specific mother who went missing with Rasmussen.
In 2020, NCMAC released a new, updated rendering of the fourth victim, keeping the pressure on the public for any clues regarding the mother. The investigation was literally marching through history, generation by generation, just to find the mother of one child.
And finally, after years of intense work focused solely on her maternal line, the last victim was named in September 2025.
The middle child was positively identified as Rhea Rasmussen.
She was confirmed as Terry Rasmussen's daughter, born in 1976 in Orange County, California. This final identification confirmed the link between Rasmussen's movements in California, where he had lived with his family, and Denise Bowden, and his subsequent crimes in New Hampshire. Rhea Rasmussen was a child born to the chameleon killer himself, making her murder an even more tragic act of paternal violence and concealment.
Rhea Rasmussen. That closes the loop entirely on the Allenstown Four. It connects four lives: a mother, her two daughters, and the killer's own daughter, all murdered and hidden together in two barrels. A profound and horrifying act that spanned 40 years of silence.
And if we look at the broader significance, the identification of Terry Peter Rasmussen via genetic genealogy stands as a monumental moment in forensic history. It's a foundational case that proved this technology works. It set the precedent for resolving cold cases that were decades old and technologically stagnant, demonstrating the power of combining modern genetics with determined law enforcement and often amateur genealogical work.
The fact that Rasmussen was identified this way before the Golden State Killer case means that the Bear Brook investigation pioneered techniques that have gone on to bring justice in dozens of other high-profile mysteries. It's a bitter legacy for the victims, but an incredibly important scientific and investigative legacy for the future of cold case work. So what have we learned from this complex chronological journey? We've traced the path from two obscure barrels discovered in a New Hampshire park in 1985 and 2000 to the confirmation of four identities: Marlise, Marie, Sarah, and Rhea, and the ultimate identification of their killer, Terry Peter Rasmussen.
We've seen the sheer power of forensic advances when married with tenacity. This investigation required traditional police work, combined with the microscopic analysis of mitochondrial DNA, isotopic evidence for travel history, and the revolutionary leap provided by genetic genealogy utilizing public databases. It's a story defined by its geographical links, connecting the killer's past life in La Puente, California, to the crime scene in Bear Brook, New Hampshire, through the aliases of one dangerous and mobile individual.
The larger implications are massive. This case is a testament to the perseverance required in law enforcement. For decades, the families of these victims lived without answers, and the victims were known only by that phrase, known only to God. Now, through the application of increasingly sophisticated technology, cases previously deemed unsolvable are finally yielding results and providing that long-awaited closure.
And what's truly compelling here is that the knowledge didn't come easily or instantaneously. It required an amateur civilian, a librarian, to spot a crucial decades-old online post. It required DNA specialists to develop and implement methodologies that were brand new. And it required investigators to hold on to the smallest, most difficult to interpret clues for 30 years until the technology finally caught up to the evidence.
As we conclude this thorough analysis, let's reflect on the full scope of the killer. Terry Peter Rasmussen was confirmed to be the chameleon killer, a man known to use at least 5 different aliases. Robert Evans, Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Larry Vanner, Jerry Mockerman over decades. He traveled across the country and is confirmed to be responsible for at least 5 homicides. This raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider. Given his documented history of movement, violence, and identity concealment, how many other unidentified victims might still be out there, connected to his other aliases and unknown whereabouts between 1974 and his final arrest?
The resolution of the Allenstown Four provides immense closure for those 4 families, but the story of the chameleon killer likely has further, yet unwritten chapters in other cold case files scattered across the United States.
We appreciate you engaging with this difficult and important material today. Thanks for listening.